Over my 5 years covering World of Warcraft, this is one of the most requested topics. I'm pretty sure it's because WoW, in trying to please so many people, has pretty much always ended up displeasing others, making the idea of a fresh slate very appealing for many. Perhaps it's the allure of reliving the good old days, starting afresh in a version of the world that's different from what people know. Well, I think WoW 2.0 will happen, but I don't think it's going to happen in the way that many people will want it to happen. You see, I think you could say that WoW 2 has already happened before many times, and I wouldn't be surprised if we were on the precipice of it happening again, just like how you are on the precipice of checking out the Drop.com X Sennheiser PC37X through today's sponsor, Drop.com, formerly known as Masteries. The PC37X is the best value gaming headset that I've seen thus far, especially because my link gives you $30 off its already incredible price. They are super comfortable over ears with zero sweat earpads and what I think is ideal clamping force and low weight, making them fantastic for long gaming sessions. Their built-in mic is also brilliant with fantastic articulation and sound quality, plus a feature that I really love, it actually auto-mutes when moved into the upright position. There's also a hardware-level audio slider on the right cup, which is perfect for when you don't want to fiddle around with the Windows mixer. And of course, being Sennheiser, you can be darn sure the audio quality punches well above its weight too, making these fantastic both for gaming and for music. So I'd personally recommend the PC37X, available only in Drop.com. It's one of the most popular purchases on the site with over 10k purchases and an almost 5-star review score. Plus, you'll score $30 off with my link. Thank you very much, Drop.com, for supporting our team, and let's get into the video. WoW's history, I really think, is in 3 eras, with one identity crisis. The original era began in vanilla, lasted through the Burning Crusade, and met its end in very early Wrath, an expansion that started off essentially being a very easy version of an older style of game, but over the patches became the foundation for World of Warcraft's second era. This era was defined by bring the player, not the class, of changing boss designs, of new formats for world content and player progression, lasting through the end of Wrath into the Cataclysm before hitting its peak in Mists of Pandaria. And then we've got the identity crisis. From that crisis, we got the new direction of Legion, from which Blizzard stumbled into Battle for Azeroth. And if you compare the prime versions of each era of Warcraft, you can see how they're distinct games. The original era as compared to Mists of Pandaria as compared to Legion. On the surface, they're all World of Warcraft, but anyone who has played all of them can tell you that they are very different games indeed. And if you're looking for WoW 2 to happen, this is how it's going to happen. And this is not going to be satisfying for some who would want WoW 2 a fresh game engine game, totally new start. After all, those Unreal Engine remakes of old zones have done so well on the internet, right? Well, that's because they're old zones. In terms of artistic cohesion, the Battle for Azeroth zones do blow them out of the water. The use of a cinematic camera in those videos and the nostalgic music is actually what's doing most of the work, plus some pretty nice lighting. Graphically, WoW is doing very well with its world. Indeed, it's a timeless art style. Just look at how good WoW stands up to other MMOs who have tried to go for more photorealistic visuals. You see, when you examine WoW's problems, it's not the visuals, it's not really those engine limitations, it's the design, it's the execution of their ideas. That's been the case for all of the good and all of the bad of the last decade. A new engine won't fix those problems. And yes, I understand why many want that new engine, but a part of that is a lack of understanding. Many do view engines as being just a single thing, and that's not the case, as evidenced by their new animation system, their new lighting system, and many of the other improvements that we've seen. An engine is really a bundle of different systems. If anything, WoW's problem is that some of those systems are very new and look great, but other ones are old and don't look as good, and Blizzard need to polish them up. I'll say this much. Character customization in WoW, it's one of the worst parts of the game, and they absolutely need to develop their tech further. But on the systems point, a quick example from our own studio. We're currently working in the Unity engine, but we've developed all of our own systems for things like dynamic water flowing and dynamic lighting for 2D sprites. Those are things that are beyond what the engine can do by itself, and it does not require a new engine refresh to do those things. You just need to make the systems. And that's kind of the point. The WoW engine really is just binding stringing together a bunch of systems. Porting WoW over to Unreal 4 is not magically going to get you the WoW that you know, but with incredible graphics, because that's simply not how those things work. The most basic form of my point is this: the game that you play is not the graphics, and it does not seem like the mechanics of the engine are holding WoW back that greatly. WoW character movement is responsive. Inputs are responsive, more so than most other MMOs. If Blizzard developed WoW 2 on a custom engine with incredible rendering technology, what would still matter would be the quality of the game, and that is dictated by its systems and by its design, not how shiny it is. Those are the things that matter, and they don't require a new game engine. And that's why we need to talk about the next big version of World of Warcraft. The level squish is the perfect jumping off point to discuss this topic. While a Blizzard developer has not confirmed to us that it will happen, Ian Hazzikostas, of course, project director for WoW, he did float the idea, and then an official Blizzard survey did say it was coming in the next expansion. So what better way to kick off a new era of the game than to do a level squish? What better way to do a level squish than to also revamp how players interact with the world? And I think this is something that could happen. Fundamentally, I think this would be key to any push for a WoW v2 that actually feels like it to players. Azeroth has become stale. It's no longer that vibrant, expansive world that everyone was immersed in back in the day. Nothing happens outside of the current continent, and even the current continent is pretty static as compared to other virtual worlds in the market. WoW is north of 100 million lifetime accounts, likely far more than that by now, and the vast majority of those accounts are not active. What would get them playing? Well, I think being convinced that they can experience Azeroth anew. So first is level squish, something that we're fairly sure is actually happening. This could take us all the way back to level 60 being endgame, with our BFA characters being level 50. Is that all though? No. I think Blizzard would have to do more than just a level squish. They'd have to change the world. Now, the first way to do that is systems. Having zone-wide events, using the smart NPCs of islands, bonus objectives, perhaps multi-staged events like with what we saw in Guild Wars 2. Essentially, a massive change to zones from a systemic perspective. Ideally one that would make them a lot less static. And with those systemic changes locked in, they could try their hand at a Cataclysm-like revamp. It could be under the guise of N'Zoth rising up the Black Empire, or it could be very different. It could be a zone revamp to the point just after Battle for Azeroth. This would allow them to flesh out the zones, to have them not be homogenized under the same overarching expansion plotline like with what we saw with Cataclysm, and they could avoid the main leveling content be so tied to a specific expansion like the Cata timeline problem. And I'm light on specifics here because the point is that this is what would signal a new era for WoW. This is the massive change that would grab headlines, that would get people talking about WoW again and potentially bring them back in the millions. Nailing this would likely get general audiences a lot more excited than just hearing, oh, World of Warcraft's going to have 5 zones, some dungeons, and a new raid, and that'll happen in a year and you can pay $60 for it. I think it would get people more hyped than that. So that's our literal World of Warcraft v2 covered. Well, I suppose v3 of the Cataclysm. But here's the thing, right? It would not do much if we were just dealing with more of the same, and we had a nice little squish, and it was just the World of Warcraft that you knew. So we must ask ourselves, what would WoW 2, as an ideal, mean for the rest of the game? Well, first, the whole world would have to matter for our max level characters. Now, this could be tied into important reputations that are continuously updated with new rewards that span the world. Players should be dealing with multiplayer events, as well as some smaller ones that would interest a solo player in the world. But it's very important that we don't just get Azeroth, but with world quests everywhere. Blizzard need to work out how to put a sandbox into that theme park, and the world is the ideal place to do that. But what about gameplay here, specifically the classes? Well, this is going to be a bit more challenging. Broadly, classes should have more abilities and should have the spec be a flavor of the class and not essentially be its own class. Blizzard have went in the direction of making 36 classes for the game, which does have its pros in them having a very defined style and being very pick up and play, but also cons in terms of player expression. So is it worth sacrificing that tight gameplay design in return for player freedom? In some genres, the answer is yes. In others, it's no. And I think MMORPGs are a genre where the answer is, more often than not, player freedom is good. Beyond the core rotation, you should have more niche abilities, especially ones that interact with the world and other characters in a way that is unique to your class. Now, talents are a bit tricky here, as I do think that Blizzard have mostly done a good job of providing you with interesting choices with the current system. Just maybe not interesting progression. So perhaps what they could do is keep the current talents, but add in class-based skill trees, maybe like the old talents, or just another smaller class-based talent row, or even have new class-based rows in the existing talents. This would give you more things to earn, which would be nice, and it would also give people more of that hybrid fantasy, and it would also retain class identity while still having strongly defined specs. And then at the end game, I've got to admit, I do kind of like the Age of Darkness Essence system sort of fake leak. Now, that's also just known as glyphs from back in the day, so yeah, spruce those up, and you've got some pretty darn good endgame customization. Now, as for an infinite leveling system, I do think the next era of WoW will feature that, but I do think the Blizzard will try to divorce it from your character's throughput. You see, I don't like how AP grinds have been at the core of recent expansions. This is World of Warcraft, this is not Diablo, and they would do well to remember that more. That said, an ever-refilling endgame XP bar could work out quite well. Now, I've talked in the past about the Guild Wars 2 Mastery system a lot, and for good reason. That's mostly non-power-based progression. Instead, it's focused on other aspects of your character. That game's most recent expansion has 8 different mount families, and each one has its own skill tree. So through these Masteries, your Raptor can have its dismount ability be stronger, can have it suck in enemies, it can make it jump further, and it can have it augment other mounts. Your Griffin can save you from falling, it can swoop down on enemies, and it can have a speed boost. The game's Glider has similar masteries, but there's so much more than that, with masteries also relating to traversal in new zones, unlocking new secrets, new activities, and far more. And this mastery system has allowed ArenaNet to quite easily add on new mastery tracks, new little skill trees, with content updates, giving players very, very good, consistent ways to progress their character. And this is all in one system that people understand. Learning things like this on an account-wide basis to me would be so much more enjoyable than just grinding out another concordance rank or getting 3% more stamina. I mean, seriously, check out the Masteries. Guild Wars 2 is not ideal, but that is one of the things they've done really well. So, Masteries, a new direction for classes, spruced up talents, and endgame gameplay customization that pretty much just amounts to a larger version of glyphs. I think that would be far, far more motivating than the game's current character progression. Past that though, let's scrap mount equipment and maybe give the mounts unique traits on a per-family basis. Let's add some tintable gear to the game, let's bring back sets, let's go with economy first crafting, and a bunch of other things like that. I actually think that sometimes WoW 2 should feel a little bit broken. It's a virtual world, players should be able to have fun and express themselves, so basically, you know the fun police? Let's just send them into retirement. So, a new world, far better character progression and better player expression. But you know what, speaking of player expression, houses. I mean, come on, what good is your big dick DPS if you don't have a big dick mansion to back up that DPS with? And seriously, player housing does not need to have gameplay tied into it, as Blizzard tried to do with their ill-fated garrisons. It just needs to be a totem to the player's achievement, something they can customize, something they have ownership of. Imagine a new player visiting their veteran friend's house, the feeling of aspiration that that new player will have. It's less about having a really cool bed in your virtual house, and it's more about being an incredible tailor who made their own bed. Blizzard have often, quite frankly, disrespected player expression under the guise of not being gameplay, as we saw with the garrisons, and that's totally missing the emotional space that a game like World of Warcraft fills for the classic RPG audience. Sure, the game is ran by a pack of theory crafters from the Elitist Jerks forum, but that's not everyone who plays WoW. Humans are emotionally driven, and those drives cannot be captured in a game of weekly to-do lists. And yeah, on that topic, guild halls, let's just do them. They're a testament to the group's achievements that are so important. Sure, the GM and the officers in the guild, they'll have a say on its layout, but that's not a problem. Players in guilds have already opted into that hierarchy. That's not a valid reason not to do them, that is an excuse. Housing can act even as a resource sink for them. Just look at RuneScape, a game that has surprisingly well implemented housing to the point point where you can actually build a dungeon in your basement. It's pretty cool. And what's great is adding to these things wouldn't be too hard. After all, the props are already being made for the game's towns, cities, dungeons, and raids by Blizzard's amazing art team, and that does make them a relatively easy thing to reward players with, providing the base system just works. So, housing, deeper classes, and a revamped world. As for the rest, well, the dungeons and raids in the game are doing really well. I mean, I joked about some of the WoW team coming from the EJ forum a minute ago, but seriously, those guys make incredible dungeons, incredible raids, the best in the industry, and the art that backs them up is gorgeous, the music is incredible. So that stuff's actually really, really good in World of Warcraft. And then looking at patch 8.2, we already see the early hints that Blizzard are moving away from some of their RNG. But to be clear, in a WoW 2 feeling expansion, well, less RNG, gear sets, continuing the Benthic gear experiment, and continuing to have interesting gear, like what we saw with Crucible of Storms in patch 8.2. Now look, in this video, I've purposefully shied away from specifics because the point here is pretty much that a revamp to class design and progression, combined with a revamp of world design and a level squish, as long as those things are all well integrated, plus one or two key features like housing, if that's well put together, the whole point is that would feel like WoW 2. You know, maybe put in a fresh UI, a fresh new player experience that isn't, a bit rubbish, and there you go. And hey, if we want some bonuses, work in more player customization for characters. Learn from the past with things like the Mage Tower. If they get those fundamentals right, the right title features like the housing, the redo of the world, the redo of the classes, then the WoW 2, from gameplay terms and experiential terms that I think loads of people really want, it's not an impossible thing to happen. It just has to be an expansion that I suppose is emotionally in tune with its intended audience, that's paying attention to more things than just the gameplay, that's trying to realize its world, that's trying to elevate the player's own experience rather than pigeonhole the player into a bunch of pretty tightly designed weekly to-do lists. If Blizzard can do that, they seriously could turn this whole show around and really give us a few good years. Will they do it? Who the hell knows? But this is basically just what I think about the topic of WoW 2.0 and what it realistically could actually be. Let me know what you think. What is your personal WoW 2? What would you want in it? Let me know down below. Thank you very much for watching this video, and with that, I will see you next time.